What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event. The death of Ken Rex McElroy. He terrorized Skidmore, Missouri for decades. Stalking, assaulting, murdering and raped two 14-year-olds who were his wives. He had an expensive attorney, so he was never charged. The law never helped the poor town. One day, the town gathered for a meeting on how to deal with McElroy. Details get a little vague here, but apparently someone alerted the room that McElroy was in the bar up the street. Quietly and calmly, everyone got up and walked over to the bar. As McElroy got into his truck, someone shot him in the back of the head. The town just went back to their business. When the witnesses, like the entire town, were questioned, everyone claimed they didn't see anything. No one has ever been arrested. There's a miniseries documentary about the incident called No One Saw a Thing. It's pretty interesting. Many of the residents believe the town is cursed because a couple of unrelated, unsolved murders and disappearances happened over the years after McElroy's murder, and they stained the town's reputation. They also interview McElroy's wife and children, and you learn how the incident affected them. It's a pretty in-depth exploration of the gray morality of vigilantism and how the consequences of actions can have long-lasting effects. In 1980, Lake Peigneur in Louisiana drained like a bathtub with the plug removed. Oil drillers on a rig in the lake had hit a mine shaft below. The rig, barges, a tugboat and part of a nearby island got sucked into the largest man-made whirlpool ever. It was a salt mine, and nobody died. Operation Mincemeat. The Allies planted a dead body with fake battle plans to trick the Germans into thinking that the Allies were going to attack Sardinia when they were in fact going to attack Sicily. They built an entire life for this dead, fake, military man, dumped him in the ocean, and successfully distracted the Germans. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel in 1838 in which 4 shipwreck survivors, at the point of starvation, choose to resort to cannibalism. So they kill the young cabin boy, Richard Parker, and eat him. In 1884, a ship called the Mignonette sank. 4 crew members survived. At the point of starvation, they killed and ate the youngest of them, Richard Parker. In 1971, a teenage girl named Julianne Kopka was on a plane that was struck by lightning and disintegrated in the air. She plummeted 3,000 meters strapped to her seat, and landed in the Amazon rainforest. Her mom had been on the flight with her, and Julianne searched in vain for her mom, but Julianne was the sole survivor of the crash. She survived 11 days alone, treating her maggot-infested wounds with fuel and using tracking techniques her father had taught her, before she found a boat that she used to make her way back to civilization. The Soviet scientists starving to death saving the seed bank of Leningrad during Hitler's invasion in the winter of 1941 to 1942 despite it being full of corn, wheat and potatoes. They ran out of food but couldn't eat anything from the seed bank since they needed to preserve its stocks. That level of dedication is just unimaginable. To go against your survival instincts and starve to death in order to not eat that food. I can't even comprehend. Wojtek was a bear who fought Nazis in return for cigarettes and beer. He didn't die until 20 years after World War II. My favorite part about that story is that after the war he lived in a zoo. It was common for soldiers from the bear's company to come visit and simply jump into the enclosure to play with him, much to the zookeeper's annoyance. The CIA was researching psychic abilities for 30 years as a way to spy on the USSR. After 30 years, the program was terminated, and their conclusion was that psychic powers probably don't exist. Edit. The actual conclusion was that the evidence for remote viewing was unfalsifiable, and therefore unprovable. Many of the more promising results were believed to be caused by information leakage, meaning that test subjects had prior knowledge about the subject they were asked about. They were unable to verify any of their results because of this, and even if the psychic abilities were real, they were unreliable at best. Due to a military standoff that took years, 15 ships became stranded in an inland sea, and over 8 years formed a multinational ship-based society that even included its own currency. The battle for Castle Itter near the end of World War II saw U.S. soldiers, French prisoners of war, and the German army fighting on the same side to hold the castle against an SS tank division. To make it even weirder, the French prisoners included several prime ministers and a tennis star. The escape from Antarctica by the members of the Antarctic expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. The stuff they went through was unbelievable. Their boat, the Endurance, was crushed by ice floes. They were stranded on the floes for over a year in temperatures well below freezing. They then took to 3 boats around 22 feet in length across the Antarctic Ocean looking for land. There were about 10 men in each boat. They missed reaching land by just a few miles at times. 2/3 of them got stranded on Elephant Island surrounded by ice while one of the boats went out in search of rescue. That boat made it through the Drake Passage, one of the deadliest places in the ocean. All but 3 of them got stranded with little food and water, while the 3 men who left became the first people to cross South Georgia on foot. They found civilization, rescued the men who came through the Drake Passage, waited months until they could rescue those on Elephant Island. Every single person who came on the initial voyage survived, with the worst lasting consequence being a single foot amputation. Unsinkable Sam, a cat that survived the sinking of 3 different ships during World War II. That cat 100% sank those ships. Apparently, death from laughter is an incredibly rare but a completely legit cause of death. In the 3rd century BCE, Chrysippus, a Greek Stoic philosopher, died of laughter after he saw a donkey eating his figs. And Chrysippus is not the only isolated case. Among the few other cases, a 5th century BCE Greek painter, Zeuxis, is said to have died laughing at his painting of the goddess Aphrodite, for which an old woman, who had commissioned the painting, had insisted on modeling. Also, Cleopatra, the ruler of Egypt in the 1st century BCE, claimed that her retainer died laughing at her husband's death. According to Wikipedia, the most recent case is that of Ole Benson, a Danish audiologist, who saw a funny scene in a comedy film and laughed so hard that his heart rate rose to a point where he had a fatal heart attack, in 1989. From what I understood from reading up on this topic, it's not the act of laughing itself but rather a fatal repercussion from a fit of laughter, such as cardiac arrest, asphyxiation or aneurysm, which causes death. For instance, Ole Benson suffered a heart attack as a consequence of the terrible fit of laughter he had. It's possible that such was the case of Chrysippus, and others, as well. Is a donkey eating figs really that funny? You had to be there. The Bone Wars. 2 rival paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, were in a race for academic clout, so they both took off to places like the fossil beds of Montana and Utah to try and dig up as many dinosaurs as possible before the other guy. But they didn't stop there, and hired spies and saboteurs to impede the other's work, as well as trying to pass off sloppy or fake skeletons sometimes. The overwhelming majority of iconic dinosaur genre that we know were either first discovered or simply got a lot of new samples to work with, and were made iconic by the amount of publicity they received. This includes Triceratops, Stegosaurus, some remains of Tyrannosaurus, Apatosaurus, and many, many more. This is also where the Brontosaurus confusion comes from. One of the scientists, I forget who, had already discovered Apatosaurus. The other then discovered a new skeleton of the same dinosaur, but intentionally put a skull from a different species, Camarasaurus, onto that skeleton and tried to pass it off as a new species entirely, Brontosaurus. The fake was unveiled pretty quickly, but the name stuck. More recently, however, we have a lot more tools to distinguish smaller features from bones, and it was found that the skeleton that was originally passed off as Brontosaurus is actually barely different enough to receive its own genus, and the name Brontosaurus was revived. I've always thought that this could make a fantastic show, especially if it includes dramatized flashbacks to how the dinosaurs and the skeletons died. At President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing loudly. And he also left a giant rotting cheese wheel to his successor Van Buren. He had received 2 as a gift, and he held a giant party in the White House where people could just show up and drink and eat of the first 1,200 pounds cheese wheel gift. But the other remained in the cellar for 2 years till Van Buren took over. An English king named Ethelred, later called the Unready, took some troops to defend against a Viking invasion. The weather was bad, so a lot of the Vikings' ships crashed as they were landing. Ethelred thought that it would be dishonorable to attack them as they were stumbling onto shore, so he kept his troops back until the Vikings had a chance to get together and form proper battle lines before he attacked them. The better prepared Vikings then won the fight and slaughtered a bunch of Ethelred's men, and he and the rest were forced to run away while the Vikings went around pillaging. Also, his sobriquet does not mean unready in the modern sense, as in unprepared, but rather ill-advised. Ethelred, the name meaning well-advised. A hilarious pun. The Great Stink was an event in central London in 1858. The hot weather exacerbated the smell of untreated human waste and industrial effluent that was present on the banks of the River Thames. Jean de Clisson, who lived from 1300 to 1359, was married to a French nobleman who was beheaded for treason by the French king. Enraged, she sold their estate and purchased 3 black warships with red sails, and became a pirate queen of the English Channel who targeted French ships. She became known as the Lioness of Brittany, and in her 13 years of piracy she would slaughter every member of a ship's crew except for one so that last survivor could go back and tell the French king what had happened. Joshua Norton was just this random crazy guy from San Francisco who hated all this political nonsense that was going on at the time and figured he could do the job better at it himself, and thus, the Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, was born. While he held no real power, the people liked him so much that they treated him like royalty anyways. Any currency issued under his name was treated like real money at many establishments. One day, he was arrested by a private security force because of his mental health, which enraged practically all of San Francisco. The police chief let him go because he had committed no crime, and Norton gave an imperial pardon to the guy who arrested him. After this incident, any police officer Norton passed would salute him. Another time, when a riot had formed and was getting pretty violent, Norton simply stood in front of the mob and calmly prayed, which managed to disperse the mob. And that's not even a fraction of the crazy stuff that he did. The London beer flood of 1814. A 22-foot-tall beer vat blew out and at least 100,000 to as much as 323,000 imperial gallons give or take flooded slum dwellings, killing 8 people. 5 of those people killed were at the time at a celebration of life service for someone else. Salyut 7 Space Station Rescue https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Salyut_7 On February 11, 1985. Contact with Salyut 7 was lost. The station began to drift, and all systems shut down. At this time the station was uninhabited. Janabekov piloted his ship to intercept the forward port of Salyut 7 and matched the station's rotation. After hard docking to the station and confirming the station's electrical system was dead, Janabekov and Savinik sampled the station atmosphere prior to opening the hatch. Attired in winter fur-lined clothing, they entered the station to conduct repairs. During World War II, the U.S. military researched the idea of dropping bombs filled with bats with attached incendiary devices over Japan. A dental surgeon, Adams, who was an acquaintance of Eleanor Roosevelt, wrote the idea to her. He explained that bats would nest in the wooden buildings of Tokyo and then the delayed timers on the incendiary devices would go off simultaneously and cause a massive fire. President Roosevelt approved the idea for study. The military found it would be highly effective compared to traditional firebombing campaigns. The only reason the plan wasn't implemented was because the bat bombs wouldn't have been combat-ready until mid-1945, so they used the atomic bombs instead. Sergeant Stubby. During World War I, a soldier found a stray dog when training on the Yale University campus, and took a liking to him. The soldier snuck the dog onto the ship when he had to leave campus, and when the dog was found by the commanding officer, he was allowed to stay because he had learned how to salute. Stubby was injured a few times during the war, but he was useful with alerting his squad of surprise mustard gas attacks and gunshots before the human ear could detect the sound. He also found and comforted wounded soldiers and caught a German soldier by the leg of his pants until American soldiers got to him. AKA, the bestest boy to ever live. Jack. a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day, and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. An official investigation was initiated after a concerned member of the public reported that a baboon was observed changing railway signals at Uitenhage near Port Elizabeth. The East German balloon escape. In 1979, 2 families escaped East Germany to West Germany by a homemade hot air balloon. Louis XIX was King of France for 20 minutes. The shortest war ever recorded was around 40 minutes long. During the Salem witch trials, dogs were also accused of witchcraft. 2 dogs were executed because of it. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and was lifted to an altitude of 33,000 feet. She landed over 3 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning and lack of oxygen. Probably that time the US government hooked listening equipment to a cat so it could spy on Russians, only to realize that cats don't follow commands, and then it got hit by a car. During World War I, the German Navy built a ship and painted it to make it look like a British ship called the RMS Carmania in order to infiltrate and destroy British convoys. On the ship's first outing, the first enemy it encountered was the real RMS Carmania, which promptly sunk it. In 1859, the Earth was hit by a geomagnetic storm from the Sun. It caused auroras as far south as Rome. Telegraph wires caught fire, and in general it was chaos. If this happened today, it would likely cause massive blackouts for weeks or even months and cause trillions in damage. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919. A tank filled with 2 million gallons of molasses burst and sent a tidal wave of molasses through the streets of Boston. 21 people were killed. I was listening to a podcast about this once, and a little boy watched his mom and his brother drown in the molasses while he tried to surf over to them on a bed that was floating, but he couldn't get over to them fast enough. Also, the people in the town would constantly complain about the tank because they saw it was leaking and might explode. They responded by just painting the tank brown so people wouldn't see it leaking. Apparently, if you go to this spot in Boston in the summer, you can still faintly smell the molasses. Edit. I will retract the last statement. I've gotten plenty of messages saying that's an urban legend. Apparently that area just smells like butts. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war against Neptune, god of the ocean. He led his soldiers to a beach and instructed them to stab the water. A couple tried to commit insurance fraud and blew up an entire neighborhood in Indianapolis several years ago, killing 2, injuring several, and destroying over 30 houses. The Biafran Genocide, aka the Nigerian Civil War. It happened only about 50 years ago and over 3 million civilians died. My dad fought in the war as a child soldier on the Biafran side. You've probably never heard of it, despite its scale and recency, because it's been almost entirely swept under the rug. They don't even teach it in history. Edit. Thanks for your concern about my father. He lost a substantial number of his childhood friends to the war. He was also air-bombed while in class and was among the few survivors, but he is pretty well adjusted as far as I can tell. He doesn't go into too much detail about it, and he still gets pretty angry on the inside, but he's come to accept it and look towards the future. Spartan weddings. Basically, young Spartans would train for years in camps, surrounded only by men. So, when the time came for marriage, the women would shave their heads and dress in men's clothing, since the idea of having relations with anyone other than a man weirded out the grooms. The dancing plague of 1518. People left their friends behind. It was terrible. It wasn't even an isolated incident. Multiple dancing plagues happened over the course of a few centuries. Strasbourg in 1518 was just one of the bigger ones. It's mass hysteria, so many interesting cases, like nuns meowing at each other. Find it on Wiki, it is a real thing. I found a book on the dancing plagues specifically a while back. Fascinating, terrifying stuff. Could be mass hysteria, or a mass stress/trauma response, or poisoning such as from ergot. But we don't know for certain. Not exactly historical, but a poodle named Cachi, in Caballito, Buenos Aires, fell from 13 floors and fatally hit 75-year-old Marta Espina, killing both instantly. In the course of the events, 46-year-old Edith Solá, who came to see the incident, was fatally hit by a bus. An unidentified man, who witnessed Edith's death, had an heart attack and also died, on his way to the hospital. Mad Jack Churchill, the man with the only confirmed longbow kill in World War II. Guy and his squad did a death march towards the Germans' hole playing bagpipes, got captured and sent to a concentration camp. He then escaped, got caught again, and then escaped a different concentration camp. Also, he always carried a Scottish longsword with him. If you think Mad Jack Churchill was crazy, go read up on Adrian Carton de Wiart. This man bit his own finger off to get back into combat, swam away from a plane crash one-handed, and considered a war in which he was shot in the head and lost a hand and an eye to have been good fun. During World War I, the German Empire bombarded Osijek fortress with gas that the Russian Empire was defending. After some time, the Russian soldiers charged at the now entrenched German positions, covered in their own blood, bloodshot eyes, coughing up portions of their lungs. The German army began to open fire with rifles and machine gun fire but later retreated because the look of the Russian soldiers was told that they looked like the undead. Which the event was now known as the Attack of the Dead Men. 4 Auschwitz prisoners stole Nazi uniforms, and a car. Only one of them was speaking German, so he was wearing the highest rank uniform. When they left the camp they encountered 2 patrols. First patrol, with some high-ranked guy, just hailed to them. Second patrol with 2 low-rank soldiers told them they can't leave because orders etc. Guy speaking German started screaming at them so loud and so realistically they just said, "We're sorry, go ahead." Children's Crusade. In the middle of the 12th to 13th century Crusades, up to 30,000 children followed a couple teens to convert Muslims to Christianity. It went about as well as you'd expect. This followed the disastrous Fourth Crusade, which had the Catholic army get excommunicated by the Pope and become a mercenary army. Leo Major, a French-Canadian soldier who among many other feats including capturing a German communications truck, losing an eye to a phosphorus grenade in the process, and capturing 100 German soldiers while on a recon mission during the Battle of Scheldt. He single-handedly liberated the town of Zwolle, thereby saving it and its population from being shelled in an assault in the morning. During this liberation he captured 90 or more Germans, burned down the Gestapo headquarters, and generally rampaged around shooting and throwing grenades so that the Germans thought they were being attacked in earnest. Dude was basically a Call of Duty protagonist. Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, went for a swim in the ocean in 1967 and was never seen again. Terrare, the French showman and soldier known for his eating habits. He ate live cats, snakes, eels, puppies and was suspected of eating a toddler. Bulgarian swineherd, King Ivilo the Swineherd, became a king and won a battle against the trained army of the current king of that time. The guy from 4chan that said he was going to kill bin Laden with a sword. Got found in the desert in the Middle East with his sword. The Great Locust Swarm of 1875. At one point the swarm was measured to be 100,000 square miles and the locust would eat everything in their path, even each other. The swarm was so thick that whenever it passed over an area it would block out the sun. In 1962, in Peru, 2 American scientists reported a massive slab of rock undermined a glacier on Huascaran, 6,768 meters above the sea. It was printed in the newspaper, and the government ordered to retract or prison time. They fled the country. 8 years later, an earthquake made a mudslide and buried the town of Yungay. The excavation is forbidden by the government. Population before mudslide was 20,000. Only survived 400. Of all of the assassination attempts on Castro, only 7 are confirmed, but there are 638 supposed ones. Basically they read like a comedy sketch. The CIA once places a cool seashell rugged with explosives in a place where they thought Castro would see it, go, "Ooh, cool shell," and pick it up. Despite this genius, he died of natural causes. Things Harriet Tubman did other than the Underground Railroad. 1. She financed and recruited for John Brown's Harper's Ferry slave revolt raid, and the only reason she didn't fight in person was she was bedridden with malaria. 2. During the Civil War, she joined the Union Army as a cook/nurse. 3. She somehow class-shifted into a spy, scout, and helped Union leaders plan raids into Confederate territory, and she assassinated several Confederates. 4. She rose in the ranks until she commanded a small raiding force of 300 Union troops from the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, the second black U.S. Army unit ever. 5. Her command, Company C, 54th, raided southern plantations, slaughtered slave drivers, and freed captive slaves. 6. In the Combahee Ferry raid, where the 54th freed 700 slaves, she was also in command of 3 Union frigates, and when a Confederate division was advancing on them, she fired broadsides from the 3 naval warships directly into the enemy troops. 7. She survived the war, and immediately turned around and started fighting for women's suffrage. In 1985, Philadelphia police bombed a residential neighborhood. The resulting explosion destroyed 2 city blocks, killing 5 children and 6 adults. The Emu War of 1932. Australia's emu population was getting out of hand. Australia decided to take military action. Australia lost. Thanks for listening.